Hey guys, it's Drake, and today I'm going to be talking about my books I've been reading the last week or two, give or take. Some of them I've been reading for longer, but yeah, I've been pretty busy, but I've been feeling a lot better about reading, keeping up with my reading lately, because I noticed if I'm so busy where I can't really read books I enjoy, it just puts me in a generally worse mood, I think. So luckily I've been able to keep up with what I've been wanting to read. So hopefully this video won't be too long. Sometimes I get to rambling, but just going to start off here with my two so-called nonfiction books I've been reading lately. And those are both the histories of the Roman Republic. I've been more interested in the Republic for a while, and not simply for contrarian reasons, though for whatever reason, significantly less people are interested in the Republic than the Empire. So I've been reading, I mentioned these I think on a video a little bit ago, but I've been reading these two books here. So one is The Beginnings of Rome by T.J. Cornell, which is from the Routledge History of Rome, and then also a book by Theodore Mommsen, The History of Rome. What's the Marianne? And yeah, Theodore Mommsen actually won the Nobel Prize in Literature back like in what, 1902 or 1903 or something like that, prior to World War I, which I think is pretty fascinating, just given the whole time period and that Europe was in a transitional phase from kind of a simpler world almost in the 1800s to the rapidly changing technological progress of the fin de siècle, the 1890 to 1910 roughly. But anyway, I'm mostly interested in the Republic because so much of the modern world is influenced by the Roman Republic, and I'm interested in how Rome itself, specifically Rome, was able to grow so quickly and maintain its growth for centuries into the Republic. And then really pretty quickly on in the Republic, you start to see evidence of decline. I think really once an autocrat has to take over, the decline has already started in a meaningful sense. But Rome was just so massive that it kept kicking around for several hundred years, and then the Byzantine Empire continues on that tradition. So anyway, yep, I've just been learning more about it. I'm still on the early years. I'm still on the first volume of Mommsen's History of Rome, which, let me see, I can't even remember how it gets to like the 300s. Talks about the change in constitution, the tribunes, an overall kind of introduction to the religion and the writing and artwork in the early period. And then this Beginnings of Rome, I'm still in the early years where it's talking about the rise of the city-state. I've gotten past the origins, and then how they kept track of history in the early period, from the Etruscans, Tarquin, and so on. But still in the early stages, taking it slowly. I don't need to rush through it at all. It's about, 700 years of history until the 650 years of history from the kingship to the Republic, and then you get Julius Caesar messing everything up, and then Augustus himself actually starting the empire officially. So anyway, reading that. And then I'm also reading Flann O'Brien, At Swim, Two Birds, which interestingly enough, I didn't realize was published 2 months before the full book publishing of Finnegan's Wake. So At Swim, Two Birds was March of 1939, and Finnegan's Wake was May of 1939, the year where really World War II really kicks up, which is just interesting. And 1939, you're still in the modernist period. Like, basically all of the modernists are still alive. Robert Musil is still alive. Virginia Woolf is still alive. T.S. Eliot is still alive. Ezra Pound is still alive. Marina Tsvetaeva is still alive. Proust is dead, but he was one of the really old. He was one of the older ones, definitely. He was 10 years older than most of them. W.B. Yeats, I can't remember when he died, but I feel like it was the late 30s or early 40s. But anyway, so many of the modernists are still alive, and you have such, like, with At Swim Two Birds and Finnegan's Wake, is there anything in there that would disqualify them from being postmodern? But they're thoroughly modernist. So just more evidence for my claim that postmodernism is a meaningless distinction in literature at the very least, although I think you could definitely defend that argument in other disciplines as well. But or at least anything that's valuable about postmodernism existed in modernism, I guess is the way I'd put it more so. But anyway, so At Swim Two Birds, I'm only about 25 pages into At Swim Two Birds, so I'm not too far in, but I kind of got waylaid by another book that just totally sucked me in. So slowly going through At Swim Two Birds. So the book that really got me is Carpenter's Gothic by William Gaddis. So I had been kind of distressed about the books I've been reading this year. Not that they were bad, or not that I haven't been enjoying them, but I just felt like I hadn't read a truly excellent book, like a book that I could add to my favorites, my top 10, 15 favorite books. I've been rereading some that I feel like, are in there already. But as far as new books I read, I was feeling somewhat distressed about it. So I thought, well, Carpenter's Gothic, I have a copy of it. I've sampled it, but I haven't read it. And I love it. I love it. I've been reading it for 3 days, and I'm 150 pages in. Of course, I knew I would love it. Of course. But, truly, I love what he's doing here, because compared to the Recognitions especially, Carpenter's Gothic is clearly a deviation, because it's 262 pages, I believe, 262, 261, 262 pages, which is, 1/5 of the Recognitions. It was written 30 years later, published 30 years later, 1955 to 1985, and he clearly was, in the same way that the Recognitions is a truly expansive, encyclopedic, kind of maximalist novel in that trajectory, Carpenter's Gothic is the opposite. It is minimalist in many senses, but I do think he still maintains his kind of encyclopedic tendency, his maximalist tendency in here, which is one of the things I've been enjoying so much. His references to McCandless being a geologist, the discussions about the liberal media in the United States, and how Reverend Yude, I think is how you'd say it, Yudi, Reverend Yude, is in Africa, and his great harvest in Mozambique, which the liberal media misconstrues and says, harvest? How can you have a harvest? Mozambique hasn't had water in 3 years. There's a famine starting. And then they complain that, well, he meant a harvest of souls, obviously. Wow, you took his words out of context. And, you can notice some very easy contemporary similarities to that line of thinking and talking. And Gaddis was already making fun of it in the 80s, which of course you had Reagan to make fun of then, which was extremely easy to do. You have the really, really sad interaction between Paul and Liz. Paul is a Vietnam veteran who's kind of a liar and, messed up. Liz is an heiress to a fortune, her father's fortune, though the money is stuck in an estate with 23 lawsuits against it. Her brother is, kind of he hangs out with all these greasy Buddhists, like Paul says about him. And, just the interactions between Liz and Paul is just terrible, but terrible in a completely understandable and human way. And so it really reminded me of Something Happened by Joseph Heller, which is, I don't know if I could make the distinction anymore, but it's one of the most depressing books I've ever read, Something Happened. And then one of my coworkers has been reading, just this past summer, he read Stoner by John Williams for the first time. And the book really affected him. And I have to say, when I read Stoner, it was good. I was pleased that I read it. Read it maybe 7 years ago. And then afterwards, I read Butcher's Crossing, which I definitely was not as impressed by. Stoner is definitely the better book. And I haven't read Augustus, which, with all my Rome stuff, maybe I'll top off my study of the Roman Republic with Augustus by John Williams, and Death of Virgil. So it kind of made me think about those. Disgraced by J.M. Coetzee a little bit, Coetzee, which is the correct pronunciation, South African pronunciation. But with that being said, you have Gaddis's classic, extreme, almost carnivalesque humor, where you have one of Reverend Yude's followers who is named, so a disabled Vietnam veteran who's in a wheelchair named Pearly Gates, okay? You just can't, how does he get away with it? How does Gaddis get away with naming a character, a disabled Vietnam veteran, who is being used as a token by this charlatan evangelist preacher, and he names this guy Pearly Gates? Just unbelievable. So let me see where I saved the section. Oh yeah. The Lord is my strength and song, and he has become my salvation, calling upon the deep baritone voice of war veteran Pearly Gates, who came forward in his wheelchair to lead the singing of Down by the River with new lyrics, composed especially for the occasion by Reverend Yude himself. After the minute of silent prayer that followed, the faces of the throng gathered before him, many of them still aglow with the memory of tears in the brilliant sunshine, were raised by Reverend Yude's voice, now calm and serene, saying that he had sought for some sign of the Lord's blessing upon their endeavor. Pointing to the lone bluebonnet, blowing bravely on the parched, barren bank of the river, flowing brilliantly before them. That there, he said in a hushed tone, is for little Wayne. Liz, you still there? Just wanted some ice in it. And I didn't want to read the whole passage, because when you guys find that, when you read Carpenter's Gothic, if you haven't already, oh, unbelievable, unbelievable. And that's one thing I should have mentioned about Flann O'Brien at Swim Two Birds. There are just some passages that they just get me, and I just laugh. And so, it's always nice to have that, especially nowadays. So those 2 books, and then I have 2 books of poetry that I've read and been reading. So one I already mentioned a little bit in my last video on books I bought recently, 4 Quartets by T.S. Eliot. I'm planning to make a standalone video about this because I've been thinking about it so much, honestly, and how it connects to Finnegan's Wake and World War I and our current time period. So anyway, excuse me. I'm planning on talking about this at length. Also, with that being said, I'm planning on reading The Prelude by William Wordsworth pretty soon. And if you want to join along it sounds like we're scraping together a prelude reading group on my Discord. So at least the Discord related to this channel. So you can find that in the about on my YouTube channel, about page, a link to it at least. And then hop in there. A lot of good people in there. A lot of really good-hearted and just pleasant people. We generally don't allow the unpleasant people to stay for too long. So if you just want a laid-back discussion about books and sharing what you love, feel free to hop in there. But yeah, like I said, we're going to be reading the prelude for an indeterminate length of time over the next span of days, span of months. So hop in there if you want to read that. I haven't read it. I haven't read Wordsworth in several years to any depth. When I first got into poetry, I read him pretty deeply, but not the prelude at all. I've really not read the prelude at all. I've always come across copies of it that have been defiled by students in their college classes and then sold them probably the day the class ended. So clearly they didn't get very much out of it. But anyway, I'm really excited for it. I'm hoping to be able to compare it to Goethe's Faust, part 1 and 2. And we'll see how that comparison holds up. That's my hypothesis. And then lastly, I want to talk about a recent rediscovery, I suppose, that I've been very pleased with. So Marianne Moore is a poet that you haven't heard me talk about probably at all on this channel. If I did, it was, just touching on her name maybe, because I've never enjoyed her poetry. Now, I've been getting back into modernism recently, which I'm somewhat surprised that I have, because I would say my first obsession and my first really deep dive into literature was into modernism. Once I really got going, books written from 1900 to 1950 really were my main interest. And then after that, I got into the Elizabethans and the, Milton's era from, let's say 1450 to 1700 was my other main focus after modernism. Of course, with some geniuses scattered in there like Lawrence Stern and a couple later authors like Cormac McCarthy and so on. But I've been going back to modernism, and I've been looking at some of these authors that didn't really take with me the first time, and Marianne Moore is one of them. Now, when I was looking into her, I realized that I had been chiefly reading her later revisions of her original poetry. And I thought to myself, well, maybe those later revisions, maybe the fact that they were revised by her late in life was what I didn't like or what didn't strike me. And so I found an edition of her poetry that maintains her original wording. And I was planning on making a standalone Patreon video about it, but I thought, why not just talk about it? I've been reading it. It's excellent. I didn't want to put it off. So I will go into more in-depth discussion about this, but just thought I'd talk about it, called Becoming Marianne Moore. Oh, Jesus. There we go. Really shiny Mylar cover. The early poems, 1907 to 1924. The thing that really made her most famous were, 1921, The Egoist put out a selection of her poetry, but no, did I say 1921? Yes, 1921. And then 1924 was her publication of Observations, which is what really put her on the modernist poetry map. And I've been reading her poems for about the last week or so, a little bit less than a week, and I really have been viewing her in my mind as a triangulation between T.S. Eliot, Hart Crane, and E. Cummings, all American poets with their own particularities. You have some of the same austerity that T.S. Eliot has. You have the same intricacy of structure as Hart Crane and some of the same oriental or fantastical imagery that I think Hart Crane has especially strongly. And then you have the same playfulness of language that E. Cummings has. Not to oversell the connection, she's her own poet, of course, and especially in these early years, I think her poetry really shines, but that's kind of how I've been thinking about it. I've been carrying around her poems, the Four Quartets in the Wasteland by Eliot, Hart Crane, and then unfortunately I don't have a small edition of E. Cummings. I have that huge 1,000-page complete poems. I was looking at that 100 poems that he has out, but anyway. So Marianne Moore, there's one poem that just like floored me when I read it the first time. And another beautiful thing, this has a facsimile of her 1924 observations. I'm a sucker for a good facsimile. So I'm just going to read out one of her poems, really not going to discuss it too much, just as kind of a here. All right, so the title, now listen to this. Diligence is to magic as progress is to flight. That reminds me of like an E. Cummings analogy almost, like just diligence is to magic as progress is to flight, okay? So here's the poem. And this was 1924. With an elephant to ride upon, with rings on her fingers and bells on her toes, she shall outdistance calamity anywhere she goes. Speed is not in her mind inseparable from carpets. Locomotion arose in the shape of an elephant. She clambered up and chose to travel laboriously. So far as magic carpets are concerned, she knows that although the semblance of speed may attach to scarecrows, of aesthetic procedure the substance of it is embodied in such of those. Tough-grained animals as have outstripped man's whim to suppose these ephemera, and have earned that fruit of their ability to endure blows, which dubs them prosaic necessities, not curios. So every line rhymes at the end. And listen to those first two lines. Okay, the title, diligence is to magic as progress is to flight. And then this image with an elephant to ride upon. You get that like carnival-esque circus imagery tied along with this like oriental flying carpet, kind of Indian, kind of simplified Indian subcontinent imagery. With an elephant to ride upon, with rings on her fingers and bells on her toes, she shall outdistance calamity anywhere she goes. What an unbelievably playful and beautiful image. With an elephant to ride upon, with rings on her fingers and bells on her toes, you can almost hear it. She shall outdistance calamity anywhere she goes. What a perfect phrasing. Outdistance, and then you have outstripped man's whim to suppose. So the calamity is almost tied to the man's whim to suppose. Amazing, amazing, amazing. And several of these other poems have, listen to this title, okay? I'm not gonna read the poem, but nothing will cure the sick lion but to eat an ape. And that's in a quote. What is that a quote from? What is she quoting? That's the other thing. She uses quotation marks in such an interesting way. And one thing I thought was really nice too is that she has, in the same way that T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland has notes at the end, she has notes to observations. Of course she's read The Wasteland. And of course Hart Crane had read The Wasteland when he put out The Bridge, and E. Cummings knew everybody. So I haven't thoroughly gone through this work here, but unfortunately this book is rather pricey. So try to get your hands on it I think the going rate's about $70, unfortunately. No cheap copies. I got this one for about half that, which is still, you know, no laughing matter. But anyway, Marianne Moore. If you didn't take with Marianne Moore, read her early versions. Some of her later versions, apart from the title, the poem's unrecognizable, which I want to read her biography, honestly. I've been getting more into Mina Loy. I've really enjoyed, and I have her Lost Lunar Baedeker, and I just recently was fortunate enough to have her stories and essays in the Dalkey Archive edition, which unfortunately they didn't print enough of, and it's pretty expensive, but I was lucky enough to find a reasonably priced copy. And then yeah, Marianne Moore. I want to read a biography of Marianne Moore. She's an interesting lady. She had Ford, I believe in the 1950s, Ford Motor Company asked her to submit names for a car. And she had, I think the name was like the Flying Utopian. I believe that was one of them. That was like her set name that she thought was excellent. Because, you know, the CEO was like, well, what better to name the best car than a poet, you know, whatever, and, you know, some fucking horrifyingly stupid idea. Well, I mean, it's ridiculous, you know, it's idiotic marketing, but whatever, have a poet name a car. But of course they didn't go along with it. She gave them excellent names, and they name it the Edsel. And then also, I think, in 1965, she threw this opening pitch for the Yankees. Ridiculous, ridiculous. That doesn't happen anymore. That doesn't happen anymore. You know? Imagine Thomas Pynchon throwing the opening pitch. Ridiculous. But anyway, this video went on longer than I thought. It tends to happen. It'd be better if I edited my videos in that way, but in another way, I don't think it'd be better. All right, hope you enjoyed. That's what I've been reading recently, and more videos to come. Death is a Gang Boss.